I sat at table 17, the one near the kitchen doors, and watched my son take the microphone at his $95,000 wedding. The wedding I had paid for. Every single dollar. He didn't know that, of course. He looked out at 150 guests, his college friends, his new in-laws, his colleagues from the tech company where he'd just made junior partner, and he said something that made my chest tighten. "I want to thank everyone who helped us get here. Everyone who believed in us. Everyone who showed us what success really looks like." Then his eyes found me in the back corner. Not everyone understood our vision. Some people, like my mom, they never really got ambition. She was always happy with her simple little life, her simple little world. But Emily and I, we wanted more. The room laughed. Politely. Uncomfortably. My ex-husband, sitting at the head table where I should have been, raised his glass and smiled. Proud. Emily's parents nodded in agreement. I just took another sip of champagne and kept my face completely still. Because none of them knew the truth. Not my son, not my ex-husband, not a single person in that room. Except for one man. He was sitting at table 12, the corporate table, Emily's new boss and his wife, and when my son said my name, I watched this man's fork freeze halfway to his mouth. His face went from pleasant to confused to absolutely white. He leaned over to his wife and whispered something. She grabbed his arm, her eyes went wide. And I knew, in that exact moment, that my secret was about to detonate in the middle of my son's perfect wedding. What happened in the next 12 minutes didn't just humiliate him. It destroyed his marriage before it even started. It cost him his career, and it taught him the most expensive lesson of his life. But here's what you need to understand. This wasn't just about a wedding speech gone wrong. This was about 15 years of lies, manipulation, and a son who was taught to measure love by the size of a paycheck. And when the truth finally came out, when Emily's boss stood up and asked for that microphone, when he said my real name and my real title in front of everyone, my son's face didn't just change, it shattered. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what that boss revealed, and what happened to my son's marriage in the weeks that followed, will show you exactly why respect should never be optional, especially when it comes to family. Before we go deeper, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My name is Catherine Morrison, and for the past 23 years, I've been one of those people you've never heard of, but who shapes the world you live in. I'm the Executive Vice President of Medical Innovation at Garrison Pharmaceuticals. If you've taken a cholesterol medication in the last decade, used an asthma inhaler, or know someone whose cancer went into remission, there's a good chance I had something to do with it. I oversee a $4.7 billion research division. I hold 16 patents. I've been called to testify before Congress twice. And last year, Forbes listed me as one of the 50 most influential women in healthcare. But my son Michael thought I was a low-level administrator at a medical supply company. That's what I told him 15 years ago, after the divorce, and I never corrected it. Let me explain why. I didn't come from money. I came from nothing. I grew up in a trailer park in rural Ohio. My father left when I was 6. My mother worked 3 jobs and still couldn't always keep the lights on. When I got a full scholarship to Ohio State, I thought I'd won the lottery. I studied biochemistry. I worked nights at a hospital cleaning rooms. I graduated top of my class with honors that should have opened every door in the world. Then I met Richard. He was charming, successful, a corporate attorney from old money, the kind of family that had portraits in their dining room and summer homes they called cottages. His family tolerated me, barely. They never said it directly, but I could feel it in every interaction. I wasn't their kind of people. I didn't know which fork to use at dinner. I didn't have a debutante story. I didn't summer in the Hamptons. We got married anyway. I went to grad school while he made partner at his firm. And then we had Michael. I loved that boy more than I thought it was possible to love another human being. From the moment they placed him in my arms, everything else became background noise. But Richard's family had plans for Michael. Private schools where tuition cost more than my mother made in a year. Country clubs with waiting lists longer than my childhood address history. The right kind of people surrounding him at every turn. And somewhere along the way, Richard decided I wasn't the right kind of people anymore. Maybe it was when I chose to finish my doctorate instead of hosting his firm's holiday party. Maybe it was when I got my first major research position and started traveling for conferences. Maybe it was when his mother made one too many comments about my background, and I finally stopped pretending not to hear them. The marriage ended when Michael was 12 years old, Not because we fell out of love, but because Richard had never really loved me at all. He loved the idea of rescuing someone from poverty. He loved having a wife who made him look charitable and open-minded to his colleagues. But when I stopped being grateful, when I stopped being less than him, when my career started gaining recognition that rivaled his own, that's when the cracks became canyons. The divorce was brutal. Richard had money, connections, and a legal team that treated family court like a hostile corporate takeover. He painted me as the career-obsessed mother who cared more about research than her own child. He brought up every late night at the lab, every conference I attended, every school event I missed because of work. His lawyers made it sound like I was abandoning Michael to chase fame and fortune, when the truth was, I was building a future that could give my son every opportunity I never had. The custody agreement gave me every other weekend and one dinner a week. I went from tucking Michael into bed every night to being a scheduled appointment in his calendar, from being his mother to being a visitor in his life. And Richard, he did something I didn't see coming. He started poisoning Michael against me. Not with outright lies, but with carefully constructed framing that was somehow worse. Your mother chose her job over us. Your mother cares more about her research than her family. Your mother doesn't understand what it takes to be successful in the real world. Every sentence designed to make Michael see me as someone small, someone who had failed at what really mattered. And the terrible thing was, Michael believed him. How could he not? He was 12 years old, living in his father's house, surrounded by his father's family, hearing the same message over and over until it became his truth. By the time Michael was 16, our dinners were silent affairs where he barely looked up from his phone. By 18, he was canceling visits, always with some excuse about homework or plans with friends. By 21, we only spoke on birthdays and Christmas, brief phone calls where we performed the ritual of family without any of the substance. And every single time I saw him, he looked at me with this expression I came to know too well. Pity. Like I was someone to feel sorry for, someone who never quite made it, someone who had settled for a simple life because I didn't have what it took to reach for more. It killed me. Every single time. But I kept showing up, kept calling, kept trying, because he was my son, and I would have walked through fire for him, even as he was learning to see me as someone not worth his respect. Here's what Michael didn't know. While Richard was feeding him this narrative about my small, unsuccessful life, I was building an empire. I'd gone from researcher to department head to division chief to executive vice president. I was making 7 figures a year. I owned properties in 3 states, including the penthouse in Manhattan that Michael thought was a tiny apartment I could barely afford. I had been headhunted by every major pharmaceutical company in the world. I'd turned down offers that would have doubled my already substantial salary because I believed in the work we were doing at Garrison. I was saving lives, changing the trajectory of diseases that had been death sentences just a decade before, making decisions that affected millions of people. But I never told Michael any of it, because I wanted him to love me for who I was, not for what I'd accomplished. I wanted him to see me as his mother, not as a success story or a career achievement or a title on a business card. Looking back now, I realized that was a mistake. Maybe even the biggest mistake of my life. Because Richard was teaching Michael that love without status was worthless. That a person's value was measured by their bank account and their job title and the size of their house. That respect was something you only gave to people who had proven themselves by society's most shallow metrics. And by hiding my success, by showing up to our monthly dinners in simple clothes and driving a modest car, by living quietly and humbly because I thought that's what a mother should do, I was inadvertently proving Richard right. I was teaching Michael that I was exactly what his father said I was. Someone small, someone simple. Someone who didn't understand ambition because I'd never achieved anything worth mentioning. The truth was sitting right in front of him, but I'd wrapped it in so many layers of humility and hope that it became invisible. And invisibility, I learned, is just another word for irrelevant. I thought I could wait it out. That eventually, Michael would mature and see through his father's games. That time and distance would give him perspective. That one day he'd wake up and realize the mother he'd been dismissing all these years was someone worth knowing. I held on to that hope for years, even as the silences between us grew longer and the conversations grew shorter. Even as he stopped asking about my work altogether and started talking about his father's connections, his father's success, his father's world, as if it were the only world that mattered. I kept showing up to those monthly dinners, kept sending birthday cards, kept leaving voicemails that went unreturned, because I believed that love was patient and that truth eventually surfaces. But then he called me. For the first time in 8 months. It was a Tuesday evening in March, and I was in my office reviewing clinical trial data when my phone lit up with his name. My heart did what it always did when I saw his name on my screen. It jumped. It hoped. It prepared itself for disappointment while desperately wishing for something different. I answered on the second ring, trying to keep my voice casual, trying not to sound like a mother who'd been waiting months to hear from her only child. "Hey, Mom, do you have a minute?" He sounded nervous, uncomfortable, like he was making a call he didn't want to make, but felt obligated to complete. "Of course," I said. Always. There was a pause, and I could hear him taking a breath, gathering courage for whatever came next. "So I wanted to tell you something," he said. "I'm getting married." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not because I wasn't happy for him, but because I should have been one of the first people he told. I should have known about the relationship, met the girl, been part of the journey that led to this moment. But I could hear it in his voice, in the formal tone, in the careful distance he maintained, even through the phone. This wasn't a son calling his mother with exciting news. This was a courtesy call, an obligation fulfilled, a box checked on a list of people who needed to be informed. "Michael, that's wonderful," I said, forcing warmth into my voice. "Congratulations. Tell me about her." "Her name is Emily," he said, and I could hear him relaxing slightly now that the hard part was over. "She's amazing. She works in pharmaceutical sales. We met at a company mixer about a year ago." A year. He'd been in a relationship for a year, and I was just now hearing about it. We talked for 11 minutes. I counted. He told me about the proposal, how he'd taken her to Napa Valley and proposed at sunset at a vineyard. He told me about the venue they'd chosen, some estate in Connecticut that his father had recommended. He told me the date. A Saturday in September. He didn't ask me to help plan. He didn't ask for my opinion on venues or flowers or anything else. He just informed me. Gave me the facts like he was reporting news rather than sharing his life. And when I asked if I could take them to dinner to celebrate, to meet Emily properly, he hesitated just long enough for me to know the answer before he even said it. "We're really busy with planning right now, Mom. Maybe after the wedding. Maybe after the wedding, like I was someone to fit in when the important things were done." 3 weeks later, Richard called. "Catherine, it's Richard. I thought you should know. Michael is getting married." "Yes, I know," I said. "He told me." "Good," Richard said, his voice taking on that business tone he used when he wanted something. "Listen, Catherine, the wedding is going to be expensive. Emily's family has certain expectations, and while I'm covering most of it, we could use some help." There it was. Not Michael wants you involved, not we'd love your support, just we need money. "How much are you asking for?" I kept my voice neutral. "Could you contribute maybe 5,000? I know that's a lot for you, but it would really help cover some of the smaller expenses." 5,000. He thought that would be a stretch for me. He actually believed I was scraping by on some modest administrator salary, barely making ends meet in my tiny apartment. "I'll think about it," I said, and I hung up. I sat in my office for a long time after that call, looking out at the Manhattan skyline from my corner office on the 42nd floor, thinking about my son, who didn't know me, thinking about my ex-husband who had never really known me either, thinking about the life I'd built in the shadows, the success I'd hidden, the truth I'd kept locked away because I wanted to be loved for something other than my accomplishments. And then I did something Richard never saw coming. I called my attorney. And I didn't write a check for $5,000. I wrote one for $95,000, the entire wedding. Every flower, every meal, every glass of champagne, every single detail of Michael's perfect day. But I did it anonymously, through a trust, under my lawyer's name, a gift from a family friend, they'd be told, a generous benefactor who wanted to remain unknown. I wanted to give my son the wedding of his dreams, but I also wanted to see something. I wanted to see if he would thank me, if he would acknowledge me, if I mattered to him at all, beyond being the woman who gave birth to him, and then, in his mind, faded into comfortable obscurity. I got my answer at table 17, and it shattered me in ways I'm still trying to understand. But before I tell you about the wedding day itself, you need to understand who Emily was. Because she wasn't just marrying my son. She was marrying into what she thought was his world, a world of old money and status and connections, and that mistake would cost her everything. What he asked me for would set everything in motion. Emily Chen was 28 years old when she met my son, Stanford graduate, pharmaceutical sales representative for a mid-tier biotech firm called Garrison Biotech, ambitious, polished, calculating in the way that young professionals often are when they've mapped out their entire lives by age 25. I met her exactly twice before the wedding. The first time was at a stiff, awkward dinner at an upscale restaurant in Manhattan that Michael had chosen. The kind of place where the menu doesn't have prices and the waiters refill your water glass after every sip. Emily spent the entire evening talking about her career trajectory. She'd made quota 3 years running. She was being considered for a team lead position. She'd just been invited to present at a national sales conference. Every sentence was a resume bullet point, every story carefully constructed to showcase her drive and ambition. The second time I met her was at the engagement party, held at Richard's Country Club, where the membership waiting list was longer than most people's mortgages. She introduced me to her parents as Michael's mother. She works in medical administration, with that particular emphasis people use when they're being polite about something they consider beneath them. Medical administration. I ran a $4.7 billion division, oversaw research that was changing the landscape of modern medicine, held patents that would outlive me by generations. But I smiled, shook hands, played the part she'd assigned me. Emily's parents were wealthy, self-made in that first-generation way that makes people both proud and perpetually anxious about falling back down. Her father, David Chen, owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across California. Started with one used car lot in Sacramento and built an empire through sheer force of will and ruthless business sense. Her mother, Patricia, was a former real estate agent who'd made a fortune during the housing boom and now sat on charity boards and organized fundraisers for causes that looked good on holiday cards. They were nice enough people, but they had a particular quality I recognized immediately. The quality of people who'd clawed their way up from nothing and were determined never to go back. Every conversation was a subtle competition. Every detail of their lives carefully curated to broadcast success. And Emily had learned from them. She didn't just want success. She needed everyone to know she was successful. The right address in the right neighborhood, the right job at the right company, the right husband from the right family. And Michael fit the profile perfectly. Junior partner at a tech firm with a promising future, good family name with old money connections, handsome, presentable, well-spoken, the kind of man who looked good in wedding photos and better on a corporate holiday card. She saw him as a strategic acquisition, though I don't think she was cynical enough to admit that even to herself. She probably believed she loved him, and maybe she did in her way. But it was love built on a foundation of what he represented, not who he actually was. What Emily didn't know, what Michael also didn't know, was that the tech firm where he'd just made junior partner was one of 6 companies my division was in active acquisition talks with. We were considering a $340 million partnership that would integrate their software platform into our research infrastructure. It was the kind of deal that could transform a mid-sized tech company into an industry leader overnight. And Emily's boss, the senior vice president of business development, she'd been desperately trying to impress for 2 years. The man whose approval could make or break her career, he reported to someone who reported to me. His name was David Kozlowski, and I'd met him 4 times over the past 8 months. Twice in boardrooms where we discussed integration strategies and compliance issues. Once at a pharmaceutical conference in Chicago where I'd given the keynote address on innovation in drug development. And once at a dinner in Manhattan where I'd presented our 5-year strategic vision to his executive team, including the CEO. David Kozlowski knew exactly who I was. He'd sat across from me in meetings. He'd asked questions about our research pipeline. He'd laughed at my jokes and complimented my presentation skills. And now he was going to sit at table 12 at my son's wedding, listed as Emily's boss on the seating chart, having no idea that the woman his newest sales representative had just dismissed as simple and unambitious was the same Dr. Catherine Morrison who held his company's future in her hands. When Michael told me Emily worked in pharmaceutical sales, I'd felt a small flutter of recognition. When he mentioned the company name Garrison Biotech, that flutter became a wave. But I didn't say anything. Didn't mention that I knew her company, knew her bosses, knew the internal politics and power structures that governed her professional life. I just listened and smiled and congratulated him, all while knowing that this wedding was going to be far more complicated than anyone anticipated. But before I tell you about the wedding day itself, about table 17 and champagne, and the moment everything fell apart, you need to understand that Emily wasn't a villain. She was a young woman who'd been taught that success was the only thing that mattered, that status equaled worth, that respect was something you only gave to people who'd earned it through achievement. She looked at me and saw someone unimpressive, someone who'd settled, someone not worth her time or consideration. And why wouldn't she? I'd hidden every accomplishment, downplayed every success, dressed down and drove modest cars and lived quietly, specifically so people would underestimate me. I'd made myself invisible on purpose. And now I was going to pay the price for that invisibility. Or rather, my son was. And his new wife. And the career she'd spent years building. Because secrets have a way of coming out at the worst possible times. And mine was about to detonate in the middle of their perfect day. The months leading up to the wedding were a masterclass in exclusion. I wasn't invited to dress shopping. Wasn't consulted on venue selection. Wasn't asked for input on flowers or music or any of the 1,000 small decisions that go into planning a wedding. Every few weeks, Michael would call with an update, always brief, always surface level. We picked the venue, Mom? We found a photographer. Emily's mom is handling most of the details. Each call was a reminder that I was an afterthought, a name on the guest list but not part of the actual family that was forming. Richard, meanwhile, was deeply involved. He went to tastings, he toured venues, he sat in on meetings with the wedding planner, offering opinions and writing checks and playing the role of proud father with an enthusiasm that felt designed to highlight my absence. I could have pushed back, could have insisted on being included, could have shown up to events uninvited and forced my way into a role that should have been mine by default. But I didn't. Because I'd spent 15 years trying not to be the pushy mother, the demanding ex-wife, the woman who made everything about herself. I'd convinced myself that quiet dignity was the same as strength. That letting them exclude me was somehow noble. That if I just gave them enough space, enough grace, enough unconditional love, they'd eventually realize what they were doing and correct course on their own. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things, but in those months before the wedding, I was still holding on to the belief that love was enough, that being a good person mattered more than being a powerful one. Emily and Michael's relationship, from what I could piece together, from brief conversations and social media posts I probably shouldn't have been monitoring, was built on shared ambition more than genuine connection. They wanted the same things: the corner office, the impressive address, the vacation photos that made other people jealous. They spoke the same language of networking and career advancement and strategic relationship building. When Michael talked about her, he didn't mention her laugh or her kindness or the way she made him feel. He mentioned her degree, her job, her connections, her family's wealth. She's really driven, Mom. She gets it. She understands what it takes to build something. As if drive and understanding were substitutes for actual intimacy. As if marriage was another business merger rather than a union of two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. I watched from the sidelines as they planned a wedding designed to impress rather than celebrate. The guest list was a carefully curated collection of people who could advance their careers or enhance their social standing. Colleagues, clients, industry contacts, Richard's business partners, Emily's father's wealthy friends. The venue was chosen not because it meant something to them, but because it was exclusive and expensive and would photograph well. Every decision was filtered through the lens of how it would look, what it would signal, who it would impress. And the price tag kept climbing. $95,000 for a single day, a single event. More money than my mother had earned in a decade of working 3 jobs. More money than I'd spent on my entire graduate education. But Emily's parents wanted the best. Richard wanted to show off. And Michael wanted to prove he'd arrived. When my lawyer finalized the trust and transferred the funds, I sat with the paperwork for a long time before signing. This was real money. Money I'd earned through years of 80-hour weeks and sacrificed weekends and nights spent in laboratories instead of at home. Money that represented my career, my intelligence, my contribution to the world, and I was about to hand it over anonymously to fund a wedding for a son who barely acknowledged my existence and a daughter-in-law who'd already decided I wasn't worth her respect. My lawyer asked if I was sure, asked if I wanted to attach conditions, requirements, any kind of acknowledgement. I said no, because I didn't want Michael's gratitude to be bought. I wanted it to be genuine. I wanted him to thank me because he loved me, not because he owed me. I signed the papers. The money transferred. The wedding plans moved forward. 2 weeks before the wedding, I received my invitation in the mail. It arrived late, well after everyone else had received theirs, forwarded from an old address because no one had bothered to confirm my current one. The invitation was beautiful. Cream cardstock with gold lettering. Michael Harrison Morrison and Emily Catherine Chen request the honor of your presence. I noticed my name wasn't mentioned anywhere. Not in the parent listings. Not in the hosting credits. Just Richard's family and Emily's family, presented as the 2 pillars supporting this union. I was a guest, nothing more. I RSVP'd yes, selected the salmon for my meal, noted that I'd be attending alone. and I started preparing myself mentally for what I knew would be a difficult day. I just didn't know how difficult. I had no idea that the secret I'd kept for 15 years was about to explode in the most public, most devastating way possible. Drop a comment right now if you can already see where this is heading. Have you ever had a secret that you knew was about to come out at the worst possible time? The wedding was at the Belmont Estate, a sprawling property in Connecticut with manicured gardens that looked like they'd been imported from Versailles. There was a string quartet playing near the entrance. White roses everywhere, easily 200 per table, maybe more. Ice sculptures flanking the entryway. Champagne being served by waiters in white gloves. A photographer and videographer team moving through the arriving guests like a well-choreographed dance. It was breathtaking, the kind of wedding you see in magazines, the kind that costs $95,000. Money that came from me, money that no one knew came from me. I arrived alone on a Saturday afternoon in September, driving myself in my modest sedan that I kept specifically for occasions when I didn't want attention. I parked in the guest lot between a Mercedes and a BMW, feeling oddly out of place, despite the fact that I could have bought both cars with cash and not noticed the dent in my bank account. I wore a simple navy dress. Nothing designer, nothing flashy. Pearl earrings that had been my mother's. Low heels that I could stand in comfortably for hours. I'd thought carefully about what to wear, didn't want to be overdressed and draw attention, didn't want to be underdressed and confirm their assumptions about my financial situation. Settled on elegant simplicity, the kind of outfit that would let me blend into the background, because that's what I was good at by this point. Blending, disappearing, making myself small enough that my presence wouldn't disturb anyone's carefully constructed narratives. I walked up the stone pathway toward the entrance, watching other guests arrive in clusters. Friends greeting each other with hugs and laughter. Family members adjusting ties and smoothing dresses. Everyone excited, celebratory, part of something. I was alone, completely alone, and I felt it in every step. At the entrance, a young woman with a clipboard and an aggressively cheerful smile greeted me. She couldn't have been more than 25, probably a professional coordinator Emily had hired to manage the logistics. "Welcome to the Morrison-Chen wedding," she chirped. "Name, please?" "Catherine Morrison," I said. She scanned her list, her smile faltering slightly. "Oh," she said. You're at table 17. I glanced at the seating chart displayed on an easel behind her, a beautiful calligraphy rendering of the reception layout. Table 17 was in the very back corner of the room, next to the kitchen doors, the spot where they put +1s who RSVP'd at the last minute. Distant relatives no one really knows, obligatory invitations that no one expected to be accepted. I saw table 1 at the front, the head table. Richard's name was there, Emily's parents, Michael's best man, the inner circle. Tables 2 through 6 were filled with Michael's college friends, the people he'd chosen to surround himself with. Tables 7 through 11 were Emily's family and friends, her sorority sisters, her work friends, her extended family who'd flown in from California. Table 12 caught my attention. Garrison Biotech, the label read. Emily's company. Her bosses. The people she worked with every day, the people whose approval she craved, the people she was trying to impress by marrying well and throwing an expensive wedding. And then, table 17. In the back, by the kitchen. Where they put me. The mother of the groom. The woman who'd given birth to the man everyone was here to celebrate. Relegated to the spot reserved for people who didn't quite matter. "Is there a problem?" the coordinator asked, noticing my pause. "No," I said quietly. "No problem." I took my table assignment card and walked into the venue. The ceremony space was set up in the garden, white chairs arranged in perfect rows, an arbor covered in more of those white roses. The September weather was cooperating beautifully, warm but not hot, a slight breeze that made the flowers sway gently. I found a seat in the back row, not because I was assigned there, but because it felt appropriate. Because after being put at table 17, I understood exactly where I ranked in this day's hierarchy. Guests filled in around me, chatting and laughing and taking photos. A woman next to me introduced herself as Emily's second cousin from Portland. We made polite small talk. She asked how I knew the couple. "I'm Michael's mother," I said. Her eyes widened slightly. "Oh," she said. "I thought his mother was—" She gestured vaguely toward the front where Richard's family was seated. "That's his father's side," I clarified. "We're divorced." "Oh," she said again, clearly uncomfortable. "That's nice that you could make it." The processional music started. Everyone stood. I watched my son walk down the aisle with Richard by his side. Michael looked so handsome in his tuxedo, his hair perfectly styled, his smile bright and genuine. For a moment, he was 5 years old again, running into my arms after kindergarten. For a moment, he was 12, crying in my car after the custody hearing. For a moment, he was every age he'd ever been, all at once, my baby and my loss. Emily came next, walking with her father. She was radiant. There's no other word for it. Her dress was stunning, probably cost more than some people's cars. Her hair and makeup were flawless. She looked like a bride from a fairy tale. And the way Michael looked at her when she reached the altar, you could see he believed in the fairy tale too. The ceremony was traditional, beautiful. The officiant talked about love and commitment and partnership. Michael and Emily exchanged vows they'd written themselves. His were about finding someone who understood his ambitions. Hers were about building an empire together. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," everyone cheered. I clapped along with them, my hands coming together mechanically, my face arranged in what I hoped looked like happiness. And when they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, Michael's eyes swept over the crowd. He saw his college friends. He saw Richard. He saw Emily's family. His gaze passed right over me without stopping, without recognition, without acknowledgement, like I was part of the scenery, like I was as irrelevant as the flowers or the chairs or the sky above us. That moment hurt more than I'd expected, more than the table assignment, more than the months of exclusion. Because in that moment, on what should have been one of the most important days of his life, I realized that I simply didn't matter to him. Not in any meaningful way. I was a biological fact, a historical footnote, but not a person he needed or wanted or even really saw. After the ceremony, there was a cocktail hour while the wedding party took photos. I wandered through the garden, champagne in hand, not really talking to anyone. Other guests clustered in groups, friends and family catching up, sharing stories, celebrating together. I stood by a fountain and watched. A few people I vaguely recognized from years ago, friends of Richard's family, nodded politely but didn't approach. I was a ghost at my own son's wedding. Present but not really there. After about 40 minutes, the coordinator announced that the reception was beginning and directed everyone to the main hall. I found table 17. My table mates were Emily's cousin from Portland, 2 college acquaintances of Michael's who seemed confused about why they'd been invited, and a couple who introduced themselves as friends of Emily's parents who'd driven up from Philadelphia. None of them knew me. None of them knew each other particularly well. We were the miscellaneous table, the leftovers. I considered leaving then, just slipping out quietly before the reception really got started. I'd seen Michael get married. That's what I came for. I could drive home, pour myself a real glass of wine, and process this day in private rather than enduring whatever came next. But something made me stay. Maybe it was hope. That stubborn, stupid hope that maybe during his speech, Michael would acknowledge me, would thank me for coming, would give some sign that I mattered. Maybe it was stubbornness, a refusal to let them drive me away from my own son's celebration. Maybe it was just the human instinct to witness things through to their conclusion, even when that conclusion is going to hurt. Whatever the reason, I stayed. I took my seat at table 17. I smiled at my table mates. I ate my salmon. And I waited. I should have left. Because what happened during the reception, it wasn't just humiliating. It was the kind of public rejection that makes you question everything you thought you knew about your own child. And I had a front row seat to my own irrelevance. Dinner service began at 6:30. The reception hall was transformed, candlelight reflecting off crystal glasses, soft music playing, while waiters moved efficiently between tables delivering plates of salmon or filet mignon, depending on what guests had selected weeks earlier. My table mates and I ate in relative silence. Emily's cousin from Portland made a few attempts at conversation, asking general questions about how I knew the couple, where I was from, what I did for work. I gave vague answers. Medical field, research. Nothing interesting. She nodded politely and returned to her phone. The college acquaintances talked quietly to each other, clearly wondering why they'd been placed at the reject table when they'd known Michael for years. The couple from Philadelphia ate quickly and excused themselves to get drinks, leaving their jackets on their chairs but never actually returning. I sat there, cutting my salmon into smaller and smaller pieces, not really tasting anything, watching the celebration happen around me like I was observing it through glass. Richard was in his element at table 1. I could see him from my position in the back, holding court like the proud patriarch he'd always imagined himself to be. He was laughing, standing up to shake hands with guests who stopped by to congratulate him, clapping Michael on the shoulder, kissing Emily's cheek. He'd always been good at this, the performance of fatherhood, the public displays of pride and affection that looked so genuine to outsiders. Emily's parents sat beside him, and I watched them bonding over shared joy in their children's union. Patricia and Richard seemed particularly chummy, laughing at each other's jokes, toasting each other's parenting success. They were the real family now, the ones who mattered, the ones who'd raised these two ambitious young people and brought them together in this spectacular celebration. I was just the woman who'd given birth 29 years ago and then faded into comfortable irrelevance. Michael and Emily made their rounds after dinner, stopping at each table to greet guests personally. I watched them move through the room, table by table, working the crowd like the polished young professionals they were. They spent extra time at the important tables. Table 12 with Emily's bosses got a full 5 minutes of conversation and laughter. Tables 2 through 6 with Michael's college friends got hugs and inside jokes and promises to get together soon. They posed for photos, thanked people for coming, admired gifts, accepted congratulations with practiced grace. I watched them get closer to my section of the room, watched them finish with table 16, watched them turn toward table 18 on the other side. They walked right past table 17 without even glancing over, didn't make eye contact, didn't acknowledge my presence, just moved on like our table was empty, like the people sitting there were part of the furniture. Emily's cousin looked at me awkwardly. "That was weird," she said. I just smiled and took another sip of champagne. Then the toasts began. The best man went first, a college friend named Brad, who told stories about Michael's fraternity days that were probably funnier if you'd been there. The room laughed in all the right places. The maid of honor went next, Emily's sister Jennifer, who cried through a speech about growing up together and always knowing Emily would find someone special. She called Michael the perfect addition to their family, called him exactly what Emily deserved. Emily cried too. They hugged. Everyone applauded. Then Emily's father stood up, microphone in hand, and delivered a speech about his daughter's drive and determination. "My Emily has always reached for the stars," he said. "Ever since she was a little girl, she knew she wanted more than ordinary. She wanted extraordinary. And Michael, you are extraordinary. You two are going to build an empire together. I'm so proud." More applause, more tears, more toasts. And then Richard stood up. I felt my stomach tighten before he even started speaking. "I just want to say how proud I am of my son," he began. "Michael, you've worked so hard to get where you are. You've built a career, found an incredible partner, and created a life that most people only dream of." He paused, letting the words settle. "Your mother would be so proud." Your mother, past tense. Like I was dead, like I was gone, like I was a memory instead of a living woman sitting 50 feet away from him. A few people at nearby tables turned and looked at me, their faces registering confusion, discomfort, the dawning realization that something was off about this moment. I kept my face completely neutral, took a sip of champagne, looked straight ahead, refused to give Richard or anyone else the satisfaction of seeing me react. He continued his speech, talking about values and hard work and the Morrison family legacy, talking about everything except the fact that I existed. When he finished, the room applauded. Michael hugged him. Emily hugged him. And I sat there feeling like I'd been erased. But then Michael stood up. He took the microphone from his father, smiled out at the room, at his room, his people, his perfectly orchestrated celebration. "I want to thank everyone here tonight," he said. "This wedding, it's more than Emily and I ever dreamed of. And we couldn't have done it without so many people." He started listing names, thanking his father for his guidance and support, thanking Emily's parents for welcoming him into their family, thanking his boss for the time off and the career opportunities, thanking his business partners for their friendship and mentorship, thanking the wedding planner, the photographer, the venue coordinator, the florist, thanking everyone who'd contributed to making this day perfect. Everyone except me. And then he said something that made my blood run cold. "You know, not everyone understood what Emily and I were building. Some people, they're happy with a simple life, a simple job, a simple world, and that's okay. That's their choice." His eyes found mine across the room, for just a second, long enough for me to know exactly who he was talking about, long enough for the message to land with absolute clarity. But Emily and I, we wanted more. We wanted to build something. And I'm so grateful to everyone in this room who showed us what that looks like, what ambition looks like, what success looks like. So thank you to everyone who believed in us." He raised his glass. The room applauded. Emily kissed him, her face glowing with pride and happiness. Richard raised his glass highest of all, beaming at his son. And I felt like I'd been slapped, publicly, deliberately, in front of 150 people. By my own son, the son I'd carried for 9 months. The son I'd nursed and raised and loved with everything I had. The son whose entire wedding I'd just paid for without him knowing. He'd just called me simple, unambitious, someone who didn't understand success, someone who'd chosen a small life because I wasn't capable of anything bigger. I set down my champagne glass carefully because my hands were shaking. Emily's cousin from Portland looked at me with something like pity. "That was harsh," she whispered. "I'm sorry." I didn't respond. Couldn't respond. Because if I opened my mouth, I wasn't sure what would come out. I was about to stand up, about to grab my purse and walk out of this reception and drive home and never speak to Michael again. About to let him have his perfect wedding and his perfect life without the embarrassment of his simple, unambitious mother. I was gathering my things, preparing to leave as quietly as I'd arrived, when I saw him. The man at table 12, David Kozlowski, Emily's boss, the senior vice president of business development at Garrison Biotech. He was staring at me, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. His face had gone from the pleasant, satisfied expression of someone enjoying a nice wedding to something else entirely. Confusion. Recognition. Shock. Absolute shock. He leaned over to his wife and whispered something urgent. She turned to look at me, her eyes went wide. David pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, stared at the screen, looked back at me. His face was now completely white. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor loud enough that several people at nearby tables turned to look. His wife grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back down. "David, don't." I saw her mouth. But he wasn't listening. He was walking toward the head table, toward Michael and Emily. And I knew, in that exact moment, that everything was about to change. My secret, the truth I'd hidden for 15 years, the reality of who I actually was, it was about to detonate in the middle of my son's perfect wedding, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. If you've ever been publicly disrespected by someone you loved, drop a comment and let me know how you handled it. Because what I did next, I'm still not sure if it was brave or just numb. I was about to stand up, walk out, drive home, and never look back. But then I saw him, the man at table 12. And his face told me everything I needed to know. My secret was out, and the explosion was about to begin. His name was David Kozlowski, 52 years old, senior vice president of business development at Garrison Biotech, the company that employed Emily as a pharmaceutical sales representative. He'd been with Garrison for 6 years, working his way up from regional director to his current position, overseeing all major partnerships and acquisitions. And for the past 8 months, he'd been in weekly meetings with my division at Garrison Pharmaceuticals about a potential partnership that could transform his mid-sized biotech firm into an industry powerhouse. $340 million. That's what we were discussing. An integration that would bring their software platform into our research infrastructure, give them access to our clinical trial networks, and position them as a key player in pharmaceutical innovation. David had been leading the negotiations on his end, and I'd been leading them on mine. We'd met 4 times in person. The first meeting was in February, in a boardroom on the 38th floor of our Manhattan headquarters. David had come with his CEO and their chief technology officer. I'd led the presentation on our side, walking them through our research pipeline, our compliance requirements, our integration timeline. I'd answered his questions about data security and intellectual property. I'd explained our decision-making process and what we'd need to see from them to move forward. He'd taken notes, asked intelligent questions, complemented our vision. The second meeting was in April, another boardroom session where we drilled down into specifics, contract terms, revenue sharing, operational logistics. We'd spent 4 hours going through scenarios and projections. David had been impressed by our thoroughness, had told me directly that working with someone of my caliber was exactly what his company needed. The third time we met was at a pharmaceutical conference in Chicago in June. I'd given the keynote address on innovation in drug development, speaking to an audience of about 800 industry professionals about the future of medical research and the importance of strategic partnerships between pharmaceutical companies and biotech firms. David had been in the audience. He'd approached me afterward, introduced his wife who'd come with him to the conference, and we talked for 20 minutes about the acquisition timeline and what approvals we were still waiting on. He'd seemed optimistic, excited, said his whole company was counting on this partnership. The fourth meeting was the most significant. A dinner in Manhattan in July at a restaurant that cost more per person than most people spend on groceries in a month. David's entire executive team was there. His CEO, his CFO, his head of research and development. I'd presented our 5-year strategic vision, explaining how their platform fit into our larger goals and what success would look like for both companies. David had asked detailed questions about my background, my patents, my research focus. He'd been deferential, respectful, clearly aware that I held his company's future in my hands. So when Michael stood up at his own wedding and said my name, when he made that comment about simple jobs and simple lives, when he looked directly at me and dismissed me as someone who'd never understood ambition, David Kozlowski had been taking a bite of wedding cake. I watched it happen from table 17, watched his fork stop midway to his mouth, watched his face change in real time. First there was the polite attention of a guest listening to a groom's speech, then confusion as he processed the name, Catherine Morrison, then recognition as his brain made the connection, then disbelief as he tried to reconcile the woman Michael was describing with the executive vice president he'd been meeting with for 8 months. The woman sitting alone at table 17 in a simple navy dress couldn't possibly be the same Dr. Catherine Morrison who ran a $4.7 billion research division. Could she? But the more he looked, the more certain he became. It was me. The same face. The same voice he'd heard presenting in boardrooms. The same woman who'd answered his questions and approved his proposals and held the power to change his company's trajectory with a single signature. I watched him lean over to his wife, saw his mouth moving urgently, saw her confused expression turn to shock as she followed his gaze to where I sat. She knew who I was too. She'd met me at that conference in Chicago, had shaken my hand, had told me she was impressed by my keynote speech. Now, she was looking at me, sitting at the reject table, while the groom, my son, publicly dismissed me as unambitious and simple. David pulled out his phone with shaking hands. I could see him from across the room, typing something into what was probably a search engine. Dr. Catherine Morrison, Garrison, Pharmaceuticals. He stared at the screen. I knew what he was seeing. My official bio, my credentials, my photo from the company website where I looked considerably more professional than I did right now. My list of patents and publications and congressional testimonies. My Forbes profile. All the evidence that the woman the groom had just insulted was one of the most powerful people in the pharmaceutical industry. And his boss's boss. He looked up from his phone and stared at me again. Our eyes met across the room. I saw the exact moment he realized the implications of what had just happened. His newest sales representative, the young woman he'd brought to this wedding as a show of support and approval, had just married the son of the woman who could kill their $340 million deal with a single phone call. The woman who'd been publicly humiliated at this wedding. The woman who'd been seated at table 17 like she didn't matter. David's face went from shock to something close to panic. I could see him doing the mental calculation. If I was offended, if I took Michael's speech personally, if I decided that partnering with a company that employed someone who treated me this way was a bad idea, his entire company would suffer. Jobs would be lost. Opportunities would evaporate. His career would take a hit he might never recover from. And all because Emily had failed to mention who her new mother-in-law actually was. Then he stood up. The movement was abrupt enough that his chair scraped loudly against the floor. His wife grabbed his arm immediately. I saw her mouth the words, "David, don't." She knew what he was about to do, and she was trying to stop him. Trying to prevent the scene that was about to unfold. But David wasn't listening. He was already moving, walking away from table 12 with determined strides, heading toward the head table where Michael and Emily sat in newlywed bliss, completely unaware that their perfect evening was about to implode. The band was still playing. People were dancing. Waiters were clearing dessert plates and refilling coffee cups. The reception was in full celebration mode. But a few guests noticed David's movement, noticed the expression on his face, noticed that something was happening that wasn't part of the planned program. The energy in the room started to shift subtly. Conversations quieted slightly. People turned to watch. I sat frozen at table 17, my hands gripping my champagne glass, watching this unfold like a car accident in slow motion. Part of me wanted to stop him, to stand up and signal that everything was fine, that he should sit back down, that there was no need to make a scene. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt and dismissed and erased all evening, that part wanted to see what happened next. Wanted the truth to finally come out. Wanted Michael and Emily to understand exactly who they'd just humiliated in front of 150 guests. I didn't move, didn't signal, just watched as David Kozlowski walked purposefully toward my son, carrying my secret with him, about to detonate 15 years of carefully maintained fiction in the middle of the most important day of Michael's life. And I realized that I wasn't going to stop it. I was going to let it happen. After everything, after the years of being invisible and dismissed and treated like I didn't matter, I was finally going to let them see me. Really see me. And the cost of that revelation was about to be higher than anyone in this room could possibly imagine. Emily saw him first. Her boss. The man whose approval she'd been chasing for 2 years. The man who could make or break her career with a single performance review. The man she'd invited to her wedding specifically to show him that she was the kind of person who married well, who had connections, who belonged in the upper echelons of their industry. Her face lit up when she saw David approaching the head table. She touched Michael's arm and gestured. "David, look, it's David." She stood up slightly, her smile wide and welcoming. "David, are you having a good time? Is everything okay with your meal?" She was already in work mode. That particular tone of voice she probably used when trying to impress clients and superiors. Eager, accommodating, desperate for approval. David looked at her, and his expression wasn't what she expected. It wasn't the warm, congratulatory face of a boss celebrating an employee's happy occasion. It was something else entirely. Shocked, confused, almost angry. The kind of expression you make when you've just discovered something deeply wrong and you're trying to process it in real time. "Emily," he said, and his voice was tight. "I need to ask you something." Emily's smile faltered slightly. "Of course, what's wrong? Is everything all right?" She was still trying to maintain the pleasant hostess demeanor, but I could see uncertainty creeping into her expression. Michael stood up, clearly sensing something off, but not understanding what. He extended his hand toward David, with that easy confidence he'd inherited from Richard. "David, good to see you. Thanks so much for coming. Really means a lot to Emily that you're here." He was doing the gracious groom thing, welcoming an important guest, maintaining the smooth social performance that this entire wedding had been built on. David didn't shake his hand, just left it hanging there in the air between them. Michael's smile froze. His hand dropped slowly. "David, is something wrong?" Michael asked. "Your last name is Morrison," David said. It wasn't really a question, more of a statement seeking confirmation. Michael glanced at Emily, confused by the question, then back at David. Yes? Why? "And your mother," David continued, his voice getting slightly louder. "The woman you just mentioned in your speech, the one you said had a simple life and a simple job, her name is Catherine Morrison?" Michael's confusion deepened. "Yeah, that's right. Catherine Morrison. Why are you asking about my mother? Do you know her or something?" He said it like it was impossible, like the idea that his boss's boss at Emily's company could possibly know his unsuccessful, unambitious mother was absurd. David's voice got louder, not shouting, not making a scene yet, but loud enough that the people at nearby tables started to notice. Started to quiet their conversations and turn their attention toward the head table where something unusual was happening. "Is she here?" David asked, his eyes scanning the room. "Is Catherine Morrison here right now at this wedding?" Emily laughed nervously, that high-pitched sound people make when they're uncomfortable but trying to pretend everything is fine. "She's here somewhere," Emily said. "I think she's at one of the back tables." We seated her near. She gestured vaguely toward the rear of the reception hall. "Why? Do you know her?" There was still incomprehension in her voice, still no understanding of what was about to happen. Michael looked between David and Emily, trying to figure out what was going on, why his wife's boss was suddenly so interested in his mother's whereabouts. David turned away from them without answering. Turned to face the room, scanning the tables systematically, looking for me. I could see him searching, his eyes moving from table to table, looking for the woman he'd met in boardrooms and conferences, looking for Dr. Catherine Morrison. And then his eyes found me, at table 17, in the back corner, next to the kitchen doors. Sitting alone because my table mates had mostly abandoned their seats, holding my champagne glass with both hands now because they were shaking. Our eyes met across the room. His face was a mixture of confirmation and disbelief. It really was me. The woman whose son had just publicly dismissed her was the same woman who held his company's future in her hands, The same woman who could approve or kill a $340 million deal. The same woman who'd been seated like an afterthought at her own son's wedding. He started walking toward me. Deliberately, purposefully. Not rushing, but moving with clear intention. And that's when the room really started to notice. The band had been playing background music during dessert, some jazz standard that was meant to be unobtrusive. They stopped. Just trailed off mid-song as the musicians noticed something happening that wasn't part of the program. Conversations died, not all at once, but in a wave that spread outward from the head table. People turning to see what was happening, whispering to their table mates, pointing subtly. Who is that man? Where is he going? Why does he look so serious? The energy shifted from celebration to confusion to anticipation. Something was happening, something unscripted and potentially dramatic, and everyone wanted to see what it was. Michael called out after David, "David, wait! What's going on?" But David didn't stop, didn't turn around, just kept walking toward me. Emily stood up from the head table, her hand on her throat, her face registering the first hints of real worry. She leaned toward Michael, and I saw her mouth moving. What's happening? Why is he acting like this? Richard noticed the commotion and stood up too, looking confused and slightly annoyed that something was disrupting his son's perfect reception. The photographer, ever alert to moments worth capturing, started moving toward the developing scene. Guests were fully turned in their chairs now, watching David's progress across the room. Watching him walk, past table after table, heading toward the back corner where I sat. I thought about standing up, thought about meeting him halfway, maybe pulling him aside to have this conversation privately. But I didn't move, just sat there, watching him come. Watching my secret march toward me in the form of a panicked senior vice president who just realized he'd made a terrible mistake by accepting this wedding invitation. David reached table 17. The few remaining guests at my table, Emily's cousin from Portland, and one of the college acquaintances, looked up at him with wide eyes. He ignored them completely. His focus was entirely on me. "Dr. Morrison?" he said. And the way he said it, with that title, with that tone of respect and recognition, it carried across the now silent reception hall. People heard it. Dr. Morrison. Not Catherine. Not Mrs. Morrison? Doctor? The title that came with credentials and authority and power. I set down my champagne glass carefully on the table. "Hello, David," I said quietly. My voice was calm, measured, giving nothing away. "What are you doing here?" he asked, and his voice had that quality of someone who already knows the answer but needs to hear it confirmed. "I'm attending my son's wedding," I said, each word precise and clear. David just stared at me for a long moment. I could see him processing, recalculating, understanding the full scope of what had just happened. "Your son," he repeated. "Michael Morrison is your son." "Yes," I said. "And Emily Chen, his wife. She works for you. She's one of my sales representatives," he confirmed. "She told me her fiancé's mother worked in medical administration. She said, you had a simple job. A simple life." I didn't respond to that. Just maintained eye contact. Waiting. The room was completely silent now, 150 people holding their breath, watching this exchange, not understanding it yet but sensing its importance. Michael was moving toward us now, Emily right behind him, Richard too, all of them converging on table 17. All of them about to learn the truth. And I realized that this was it. The moment I'd been avoiding for 15 years. The moment when the careful fiction I'd constructed came crashing down, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. David stopped 3 feet from my table, close enough that I could see the conflict on his face, the disbelief, the dawning horror of what he'd just witnessed. He looked at me like he was trying to reconcile 2 completely different versions of reality. The powerful executive he'd been meeting with for months, and the dismissed mother sitting alone at the worst table in the room. "Dr. Morrison," he said. And that title? That simple prefix before my name, it cut through the silence of the reception hall like a gunshot. I heard someone gasp, heard the sharp intake of breath from multiple directions as people registered what he'd just called me. Doctor. Not Miss. Not Mrs., just Doctor. The title that meant something, that signified credentials and education and authority. I set down my champagne glass, slowly and deliberately. "Hello, David," I said. My voice was calm, steady. I'd spent decades in boardrooms and congressional hearings. I knew how to control my voice, even when everything inside me was shaking. He just stared at me for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds. I could see his mind working, trying to process what was happening, trying to figure out what to do next. "What are you doing here?" he finally asked. The question came out, strangled, confused. "I'm attending my son's wedding," I said simply, each word clear and measured. "Your son," he repeated, like he needed to hear it again to believe it. "Michael Morrison is your son." "Yes," I confirmed. There was no point in denying it, no point in trying to manage this situation or soften it. The truth was coming out whether I wanted it to or not, whether I was ready for it or not. I watched David's face cycle through emotions. Shock gave way to understanding. Understanding gave way to something that looked almost like anger. Not at me, at the situation, at what he'd just witnessed. He turned around slowly. The entire room was watching now. Not pretending to look away, not politely ignoring the scene. Everyone was staring, watching this confrontation unfold, waiting to understand what was happening. Michael was still standing near the head table. His face had gone from confused to concerned. He started walking toward us. Emily right beside him, her hand clutched in his. Richard was moving too, coming from the other direction, his expression annoyed at this disruption to his son's perfect day. But David spoke before any of them could reach us. His voice carried across the silent reception hall, projecting in a way that made it clear he wanted everyone to hear. "Did you just—" He paused, seemed to be gathering himself. "Did you just call her unsuccessful?" The question hung in the air, accusatory, disbelieving. Everyone turned to look at Michael. Michael's face went pale. That particular shade of white that happens when all the blood drains away in an instant, when your body goes into shock. "I didn't," he started, then stopped. "What are you talking about?" But his voice was weak, uncertain. He knew exactly what David was talking about. David pointed at me, that gesture drawing every eye in the room back to table 17. "To me. That woman," David said. "Your mother. Did you just stand up in front of everyone here and say she has a simple job and a simple life?" The words were thrown back at Michael with cutting precision. Michael stammered. "I mean, she works in medical administration. I didn't mean anything by it. I was just—" He was floundering now, looking to Emily for support, looking to Richard, looking anywhere but at me, looking for someone to help him out of this moment. But no one was helping. Everyone was watching. David cut him off, his voice rising now, not quite shouting but getting close. "She doesn't work in medical administration," he said, each word emphasized. "She runs medical innovation for one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world." The silence that followed was absolute, complete, the kind of silence that happens when something shocking is revealed and everyone needs a moment to process it. I watched the information spread across the room like a wave, saw faces change, saw people lean toward each other and whisper, saw Michael's expression shift from confusion to understanding, to something that looked like horror, saw Emily's hand fly to her mouth, saw Richard freeze in place, his face registering genuine shock for maybe the first time in his life. "Dr. Catherine Morrison," David continued, and now he was looking at Emily. "Your new mother-in-law is the Executive Vice President of Medical Innovation at Garrison Pharmaceuticals." Emily made a sound. Not quite a word, more like a wounded noise, a realization of catastrophic error. Michael was shaking his head slowly. "No," he said quietly. "That's not. Mom doesn't. She never said." He was talking to himself more than anyone else, trying to reconcile what he was hearing with what he'd believed for 15 years. David wasn't done. He was on a roll now. Whatever restraint he'd been trying to maintain was gone. He was angry. At the situation. At the disrespect he'd witnessed. At the implications for his company. "She oversees a $4.7 billion research division," he said. "She holds 16 patents. She's testified before Congress. Twice. She's one of the most respected voices in pharmaceutical innovation in the entire country." Each fact landed like a blow. Each one dismantling the narrative Michael had constructed about his simple, unsuccessful mother. Emily was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. She understood before Michael did, understood what this meant for her career, for their future. Michael finally looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the moment it hit him, the full weight of what he'd done, what he'd said, who he'd said it to. "Mom," his voice cracked. "Is that true?" I met his eyes, held his gaze. "Yes, Michael," I said quietly. "It's true," but my voice carried in the silence. Everyone heard. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. And there was anguish in his voice now. Real pain. "Because you never asked," I said simply. Because you decided 15 years ago who I was and what I was worth. And nothing I could have said would have changed your mind. You believed your father. You believed the story that made you feel better about yourself. And I let you because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not for what I've accomplished. I paused. Let that sink in, but I see now that was a mistake. Because respect shouldn't be conditional on success. And love shouldn't require you to diminish yourself. Richard had reached us by now. He was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Catherine, he said. He couldn't seem to finish the sentence. Yes, Richard, I said. I'm exactly what David just said I am. I have been for 20 years, since before the divorce, since during the divorce, since after. You just never bothered to pay attention. You were so busy telling Michael I was unsuccessful that you never noticed I was building something extraordinary. Richard's mouth opened and closed. He looked like a fish out of water, gasping, unable to process this information. But all those custody hearings, he finally managed. You said you worked in research. You do work in research, I corrected. I run research. There's a difference. Emily's parents had joined the crowd now. Patricia and David Chen, standing behind their daughter, looking confused and increasingly worried as they began to understand that something had gone very wrong. David Kozlowski was still standing there, still processing, still looking at me, and then at Emily, and then back at me. Dr. Morrison, he said, and his voice was quieter now, more controlled. I need to ask you something. I nodded. Go ahead. The partnership we've been discussing, the acquisition talks, does this? He gestured at the room. At the situation. Does this change anything? I looked at him for a long moment, watched him sweat, watched Emily's face as she realized her career was hanging in the balance, watched Michael understand that his wife's professional future was in jeopardy because of what he'd said about me. David, I said finally, the partnership discussions are based on the merits of your company's technology and its fit with our strategic goals. They have nothing to do with my personal life. I paused. However, I will be recusing myself from the final decision. There's clearly a conflict of interest now. Someone else will handle the approval process. Relief flooded his face. Thank you, he said. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I know you didn't, I said gently. This isn't your fault. But then I turned to Emily. She was still crying, mascara running down her face, her perfect wedding day makeup ruined. Emily, I said. She looked up at me with red eyes. Yes? You're a good sales representative, from what I understand. You make your numbers, you work hard. But you need to learn something important. Respect isn't something you only give to people who can help your career. It's something you give to everyone, regardless of their title or status or usefulness to you. She nodded, unable to speak. I continued. I hope this experience teaches you that the person you dismiss today might be the person who controls your future tomorrow. And more importantly, that people have inherent worth beyond what they can do for you. She was sobbing now. I'm sorry, she managed to say. I'm so sorry, Dr. Morrison. I nodded. I accept your apology. But the person you really need to apologize to is the version of me you thought I was. Because she deserved your respect too. Even if she'd been exactly who you thought she was, a low-level administrator with a simple job, she still deserved to be treated with dignity, especially by her son. The whispers started then, spreading through the reception hall like wildfire. Did you hear what he said? She's an executive VP. She runs a billion-dollar division. That woman in the back, the one at table 17? People were pulling out their phones now, looking me up, searching for Dr. Catherine Morrison Garrison Pharmaceuticals. I could see the glow of screens throughout the room. See faces changing as they found my professional profile, my credentials, my photo from the company website where I looked nothing like the woman in the simple navy dress sitting at the reject table. The cognitive dissonance was playing out in real time across 150 faces. How could the woman the groom had just dismissed as simple and unambitious be the same person whose biography listed achievements most people couldn't imagine reaching in 3 lifetimes? David Kozlowski walked back toward Emily. His stride was purposeful now. He'd moved past shock into something else. Something that looked like barely controlled fury. Not at me. At the situation. At the professional nightmare he'd just walked into. At the fact that his newest sales representative had just publicly humiliated one of the most powerful people in their industry. Do you know who you just humiliated in front of your entire wedding? He said to Emily. It wasn't really a question. More of an accusation. Emily couldn't speak, just shook her head mutely. Tears were streaming down her face now, ruining the makeup she'd probably spent hours perfecting. Her hands were shaking. She knew something terrible was happening, but she didn't yet understand the full scope of it. Michael put his arm around her, but she shrugged it off. This was his fault. His speech, his dismissal of his mother, and she was about to pay the price for it, professionally. "That's Dr. Catherine Morrison," David said, each word deliberate, emphasized. "She's the executive vice president of medical innovation at Garrison Pharmaceuticals. She oversees a $4.7 billion research division." $4.7 billion, Emily. That's larger than our entire company's valuation. She holds 16 patents, patents that have saved countless lives, patents that generate hundreds of millions in revenue. She's testified before Congress twice about pharmaceutical policy and drug development. She's spoken at every major medical conference in the world. Last year, Forbes listed her as one of the 50 most influential women in healthcare. And you just introduced her to your parents as someone who works in medical administration. The details landed like bombs, each one detonating Michael and Emily's understanding of reality. Each one making the gap between who they thought I was and who I actually am wider and more humiliating. "The acquisition we've been working on for 8 months, David continued. "The partnership that could make or break our company's future. The deal that's been keeping me up at night because it represents everything we've been building toward." Emily nodded slightly. She knew about the acquisition, had probably heard David and the other executives talking about it, had maybe even celebrated when things seemed to be progressing well. "She's the one we report to," David said. "She's the one who has final approval. Every meeting I've been in for the past 8 months, every presentation I've given, every proposal I've submitted, it all goes to her desk eventually. She's not just my boss's boss. She's the reason our company even exists in its current form. Without the partnerships she's approved, without the contracts she's signed, Garrison Biotech would still be a startup scrambling for funding." Emily's eyes went wide. The full horror of what she'd done was finally registering. She'd humiliated the woman who controlled her company's future, the woman who could destroy her career with a phone call. Michael had sat down, just collapsed back into his chair at the head table. His head was in his hands, his shoulders were shaking. I couldn't tell if he was crying or just trying to process what was happening. His perfect wedding, his perfect speech, his perfect performance of success, it was all crumbling around him. Richard was still standing there looking stunned. This wasn't computing for him. Catherine couldn't be successful. She was the woman he'd painted as career-obsessed, but ultimately unsuccessful. The woman who'd chosen work over family and had nothing to show for it. The woman whose modest lifestyle proved he'd been right to leave her. Except she wasn't that woman. She'd never been that woman. She'd just let him believe it. Let him build his narrative while she quietly became one of the most powerful people in an industry that shaped the health and lives of millions of people. David pulled out his phone. His fingers moved quickly across the screen, typing something, searching for something. He stared at what he found. His face went even paler if that was possible. "Oh my God," he said quietly. But in the silence of the reception hall, everyone heard it. Emily's voice came out as barely a whisper. "What? What is it?" David looked at me, then at Emily, then at Michael. Then he turned slowly, taking in the venue around us. The flowers, the ice sculptures, the elegant table settings, the string lights overhead. The whole elaborate production that was this wedding. "Who paid for this wedding?" he asked. The question seemed to come from nowhere, seemed disconnected from what they'd been talking about. But I knew where he was going, knew what he'd just found on his phone, knew the final piece of the puzzle was about to fall into place. Richard stepped forward, finally finding his voice, finding his role as the man in charge. "I did," he said firmly. "Mostly, I covered the majority of the costs. We all contributed what we could." He was trying to reassert control, trying to claim credit, trying to maintain his position as the successful father who'd given his son a beautiful wedding. David shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "That's not what the venue records show. I just pulled up the contract filing. Public record for events of this size. This wedding was paid for by Morrison Medical Trust." He looked directly at me. "A trust registered to Dr. Catherine Morrison." Complete silence. You could have heard a pin drop. Every single person in that room turned to look at me, all at once. 150 pairs of eyes, all focused on the woman at table 17. The woman who'd been dismissed and overlooked and humiliated. The woman who'd just been revealed as not only wildly successful, but also as the person who'd funded the entire event they were all enjoying. I set down my champagne glass. The clink of crystal on table was audible in the silence. I stood up slowly, smoothed my simple navy dress, tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, and for the first time that entire night, I smiled. Not a polite smile, not a forced smile, a real smile. The smile of someone who'd been holding their breath underwater for 15 years and was finally allowed to surface and breathe. The smile of someone whose truth was out and who no longer had to hide or diminish or make herself small. The smile of someone who'd been invisible and was suddenly, dramatically, impossible to ignore. What I said next, I'd been holding it in for 15 years, and it felt like finally exhaling after holding my breath underwater. I walked from table 17 to the center of the reception hall. It wasn't a long walk, maybe 30 feet, but it felt like miles. Every eye in that room followed me. Every conversation had stopped. Every phone had been lowered. Every fork had been set down. The only sound was my heels clicking against the polished floor and the rustle of my dress as I moved. You could have heard a pin drop. The attention was total and complete in a way it hadn't been all evening. During the ceremony, during dinner, during the toasts, I'd been invisible. But now, walking across that silent room with 150 people watching, I was the only thing anyone could see. I wasn't trying to make a dramatic entrance, wasn't trying to command the room. I was simply walking toward my son, because after 15 years of silence and diminishment and careful invisibility, I finally had something to say, and I needed to say it to his face. Michael was crying. Silent tears streaming down his face, his expression completely shattered. He looked younger than his 29 years in that moment. Looked like the boy I'd raised, the child I'd loved, before Richard had gotten into his head and poisoned him against me. Emily was standing next to him, but she looked like she might be sick. Her face had gone from flushed to pale, her hand pressed against her stomach like she was trying to hold herself together physically. Her carefully styled hair was coming loose. Her makeup was streaked with tears. This was supposed to be the best day of her life, and it was turning into her worst nightmare. Richard just stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. And maybe he was. Maybe in all the years we'd been married, all the years we'd been divorced, he'd never actually seen me. Never looked past his own assumptions and prejudices to notice who I really was. The shock on his face would have been satisfying if I'd had any emotional energy left to spare for satisfaction. But I didn't. All my focus was on Michael. I stopped in front of the head table, just a few feet away from where my son sat in his wedding finery, looking absolutely destroyed. I looked at him for a long moment. Really looked at him. Memorized his face because I didn't know if I'd see it again after tonight. Didn't know if this was the end of our relationship or some kind of terrible new beginning. And then I spoke. Quietly, calmly. But the acoustics in the room were good, and everyone heard me. Michael, I said, I have spent 15 years trying to figure out how to reach you. How to show you that love doesn't come with a price tag. That a mother's worth isn't measured by her job title or her bank account. My voice was steady, but there was emotion underneath it. Controlled, but present. The pain of 15 years of rejection compressed into a few simple sentences. I let you believe I was unsuccessful because I wanted you to love me for who I am. Not for what I've accomplished, not for what I could give you, not for the patents I hold or the division I run or the money I make. I wanted you to love me because I'm your mother. Because I carried you and raised you and loved you unconditionally, even when you stopped loving me back. I paid for this wedding, I continued. Every dollar of it. The venue, the flowers, the food, the band, the photographer, every single detail that you and Emily agonized over for months. $95,000. I wrote the check and put it in a trust and had my lawyer handle it anonymously because despite everything, despite the years of silence and the monthly dinners where you barely looked at me and the phone calls that never came, you're still my son. And I wanted you to have the wedding of your dreams. I paused. Let that information settle. Watched Michael's face crumple further as the full weight of what I was saying hit him. Mom, he started. His voice cracked. I held up my hand. Not harshly. Just a gentle gesture that said, wait, let me finish. I need to say this. He stopped talking. I didn't tell you because I wanted to see if you would thank me, I said. If you would acknowledge me. If I mattered to you at all, just as your mother. Not as a bank account or a resource or an obligation. Just as the woman who loves you. You answered that question tonight. The silence that followed was absolute. Michael was openly sobbing now. Emily had her hand over her mouth. Richard looked like he'd been punched. But I wasn't done. I turned to Emily. She flinched slightly when my gaze landed on her. "I'm sorry your boss had to be the one to tell you who I am," I said. My tone wasn't angry, just tired, sad. "I'm sorry you're finding out this way. And I'm genuinely sorry for what this means for your career. Because I was sorry. Not sorry for the truth coming out, but sorry that she was collateral damage in a family conflict that had nothing to do with her until she married into it." Emily's voice came out shaking, barely audible. "Dr. Morrison? I didn't..." She couldn't seem to finish the sentence. "I didn't know." "I'm so sorry." "I know you didn't know," I said. "But you should have treated me with respect anyway. Not because of my job, not because of what I could do for you or your career, but because I'm a human being. And your husband's mother. Basic human decency shouldn't be conditional on someone's perceived status or usefulness to you." I picked up my purse from where I'd left it at table 17. One of the remaining guests had brought it to me during the chaos. I looked at Michael one last time. His face was in his hands now, his shoulders shaking. My baby boy, who'd grown into a man I didn't recognize. A man who'd learned all the wrong lessons about what mattered in life. "Congratulations on your marriage," I said. The words came out softer than I intended, almost gentle despite everything. "I hope it lasts longer than your apology will." And then I turned and walked toward the exit. My heels clicked against the floor again. Every eye followed me again. But this time, I wasn't invisible. This time, I wasn't dismissed. This time, I was exactly who I'd always been, and everyone in that room finally knew it. Behind me, I heard Michael say my name. "Mom. Wait. Please." But I didn't stop. Didn't turn around. Just kept walking. Through the reception hall. Past the coordinator with her clipboard, who pressed herself against the wall to let me pass. Out into the cool September evening. I made it to my car before the shaking started. Sat in the driver's seat with my hands gripping the steering wheel, my whole body trembling with adrenaline and grief, and a strange kind of relief. My phone started buzzing almost immediately. Text after text. "Michael, please call me. Mom, I'm so sorry. Please don't leave. I didn't know. Richard, Catherine, we need to talk. Emily, Dr. Morrison, I'm so sorry, please forgive me." Even some from numbers I didn't recognize, probably guests who'd somehow gotten my contact information and wanted to express their shock or support or judgment. I turned the phone off. Didn't want to hear it. Didn't want to engage. Just sat there in the parking lot while inside the reception hall, my absence probably became the only thing anyone could talk about. The mother who'd been humiliated, the executive who'd been dismissed, the woman who'd paid for everything and received nothing but contempt in return. Eventually, I started the car. Drove home through streets that seemed quieter than usual, let myself into my penthouse apartment, poured a glass of wine, and cried. Not because I regretted what I'd done, but because I'd finally accepted a truth I'd been avoiding for 15 years. My son didn't love me. Not really. He loved the idea of me that served his narrative. And when that idea shattered, when he was forced to see me as I actually was, he didn't see his mother. He saw a threat to his self-image. The drive home was a blur. 45 minutes from Connecticut, back to Manhattan, and I don't remember most of it. My body was operating on autopilot, hands on the wheel, eyes on the road, while my mind replayed the evening in fragments. Michael's face when David said, "My title." Emily's tears. Richard's shock. The absolute silence of that reception hall. The weight of 150 pairs of eyes watching me walk out. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. It was in my purse on the passenger seat, and I could feel it vibrating constantly. Message after message coming through. Part of me wanted to throw it out the window, just toss it onto the highway and drive away from all of it. But I didn't. Just let it buzz. Let the messages pile up. Knew I'd have to deal with them eventually, but not now. Not while I was still shaking. Not while the adrenaline was still coursing through my system, making my hands tremble and my heart race. When I finally pulled into my building's parking garage, I sat in the car for 10 minutes before I could make myself move. Just sat there in the dim fluorescent lighting, listening to my phone buzz, watching my hands shake on the steering wheel. The security guard doing his rounds tapped on my window at one point. "You okay, Dr. Morrison?" I nodded. Managed a smile. "Just a long evening." He nodded back, clearly sensing I didn't want to talk, and continued his patrol. Once he was gone, I finally picked up my phone. Unlocked it, watched the messages flood the screen. 17 from Michael, 12 from Richard, 8 from Emily, 3 from David Kozlowski apologizing for the scene, 2 from Emily's parents. Even one from the wedding coordinator asking if I was all right and if there was anything she could do. I scrolled through them quickly, not reading carefully, just scanning. Michael's messages were desperate. "Mom, please call me. Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. How could I have known? Please don't leave like this. We need to talk. I'm coming to your apartment. Please answer. Mom, please." They went on like that, variations on the same theme. Apologies mixed with excuses, mixed with pleas for contact. Richard's messages started apologetic and quickly turned accusatory. "Catherine, I had no idea about your position. We should talk." Then, an hour later, "You embarrassed Michael in front of everyone. This was his wedding." Then another. "What you did was inappropriate regardless of the circumstances. There should have been a private conversation." I felt a bitter laugh escape my throat sitting there in my car. Inappropriate. I'd been seated at table 17, dismissed in a public speech, mocked for my supposed lack of ambition. But my response was inappropriate. Of course it was. In Richard's world, I was supposed to accept humiliation quietly. Was supposed to preserve Michael's dignity even at the cost of my own. Emily's messages were different. Shorter. More genuinely remorseful. "Dr. Morrison, I am so deeply sorry. I had no idea who you were. Michael never told me. Please forgive me. I never meant to disrespect you. I understand if you can't forgive me, but please know I'm truly sorry." Then later, "I understand if this affects my job. I take full responsibility. I don't blame you if you decide the partnership isn't appropriate." She understood consequences in a way Michael didn't seem to. Understood that actions have repercussions beyond hurt feelings. That publicly humiliating a senior executive might cost more than just a relationship. I felt sorry for her in that moment. She'd married into a family situation she didn't understand. Had been given false information about who I was, and now her career hung in the balance because of it. David Kozlowski's messages were professional but clearly stressed. "Dr. Morrison, I sincerely apologize for the scene tonight. I felt it was important that the truth come out, but I may have handled it poorly. Please let me know if you need anything. Also confirming that I understand you'll be recusing yourself from the partnership decision. We'll coordinate with your office on next steps." I turned off my phone, just held down the power button until the screen went black. Couldn't look at it anymore. Couldn't handle the constant buzzing. The constant demands for my attention and forgiveness and explanation. I needed silence, needed space, needed to process what had just happened without the noise of everyone else's reactions and needs and apologies. I took the elevator up to my apartment, the penthouse Michael thought was a modest one-bedroom I could barely afford. Let myself in, kicked off my heels in the entryway, walked through the dark apartment to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of wine from a bottle that cost more than the monthly rent on the trailer I'd grown up in, carried it to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Central Park. Stood there in the dark, looking out at the city lights, at the life I'd built, at the success I'd achieved, at everything I'd worked for and everything I'd hidden. And I cried. Not delicate tears, not quiet sadness. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere in my chest I'd been keeping locked down for years. I cried for the daughter who'd worked 3 jobs to put food on the table. I cried for the scholarship student who'd cleaned hospital rooms at night to pay for textbooks. I cried for the young wife who'd tried so hard to be good enough for a family that never accepted her. I cried for the mother who'd lost custody of her son and spent 15 years trying to earn back his love. I cried for the woman who'd hidden her accomplishments because she thought humility was the same as worthiness. And I cried because I'd finally accepted a truth I'd been avoiding for longer than I cared to admit. My son didn't love me. Not really. He loved an idea of me. The small, simple, unsuccessful mother who made him feel better about himself by comparison. The cautionary tale he could point to when explaining why he was so driven. The woman who'd settled for less so he could justify reaching for more. When that illusion shattered tonight, when he was forced to see me as I actually was, powerful and accomplished and successful beyond anything he'd imagined, he didn't see his mother. He saw a threat, a challenge to his narrative, a disruption to the story he'd been telling himself about his life and his choices and his path. If I was successful, then what did that make him? If I'd built something extraordinary while also being his mother, then what excuse did he have for cutting me out of his life? If I deserved respect based on my achievements, then what did it say about him that he'd given me none? The text messages sitting unread on my powered-down phone weren't really apologies. They were attempts to manage his own guilt and confusion. To make sense of a reality that didn't match his assumptions. To find a way back to equilibrium where he could still be the hero of his own story. But I didn't want to help him do that anymore. Didn't want to make myself smaller so he could feel bigger. Didn't want to hide my truth so he could live in his comfortable fiction. I finished my wine standing at that window, watching the city that had watched me transform from a girl from a trailer park to a woman with real power and influence. The city where I'd earned my degrees and built my career and made my mark. The city that knew my worth even when my own family didn't. And I made a decision. I wasn't going to apologize. Wasn't going to soften what happened. Wasn't going to call Michael back and tell him it was okay, that I understood, that we could move past this, because it wasn't okay. I didn't fully understand how a son could treat his mother that way, and I wasn't sure we could move past it, or even if we should. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. Some relationships, once they show you their true nature, can't be unseen. I'd spent 15 years trying to earn Michael's love by being less than I was. Maybe it was time to find out if he could love me for being exactly who I am. And if he couldn't, well, that would be painful. But at least it would be honest. At least I'd finally be living in truth instead of carefully maintained fiction. I took the next 3 days off work. Used personal time I'd accumulated over years of barely taking vacations. Sent a brief email to my executive assistant saying I was unavailable and would return Thursday. Didn't check my work email. Didn't answer my office phone. Didn't attend the meetings that were automatically scheduled on my calendar. I just needed space. Needed time to process what had happened without the demands of running a $4.7 billion division. My team could handle things for a few days. They were competent professionals who didn't need me micromanaging every decision. And I needed to not be Dr. Catherine Morrison, Executive Vice President, for just a little while. Needed to just be Catherine, a woman who'd had a terrible weekend and needed time to recover. Thursday morning, I was drinking coffee in my apartment and mentally preparing to return to work when my personal cell phone rang. My assistant, Jennifer. She had both numbers, but knew to only use the personal one in genuine emergencies. I answered. Jennifer? What's wrong? Dr. Morrison, I'm so sorry to bother you on your time off. Her voice was tense, apologetic. But there's a situation developing that I thought you should know about. I set down my coffee. What kind of situation? Emily Morrison. Well, Emily Chen technically since she just got married. She's been trying to reach you. She's called the office 17 times since Monday. She's emailed. She's even shown up to the building twice, but security wouldn't let her up without an appointment. She's asking for a meeting, saying it's urgent. I sighed. Tell her I'm unavailable. I did, Jennifer said. Multiple times, but she's insistent. She's saying it's urgent. About her job. I paused. Let that sink in. About her job. So it was starting. The professional consequences I'd known were coming, but had hoped might be avoided. What happened? I asked quietly. Jennifer hesitated. I'm not supposed to know this, she said carefully. But I have a friend who works in HR at Garrison Biotech, she told me in confidence. David Kozlowski called an emergency meeting with the Garrison Biotech executive team first thing Monday morning. Told them what happened at the wedding. And they made some decisions. What kind of decisions? They're pulling Emily from the acquisition project, Jennifer said. They think she's a liability. Too much personal connection to you now. Conflict of interest. They're worried that her involvement might jeopardize the partnership. Did they fire her? I asked. The question came out flat. Emotionless. Not yet, Jennifer said. But they moved her to a different division. It's technically a lateral move on paper, but everyone knows it's a demotion. She went from working on major partnerships and acquisitions to managing existing small accounts. From high-profile work that could make her career to maintenance work that goes nowhere. And word is spreading fast. People are talking. I closed my eyes. Of course they were talking. In pharmaceutical sales, reputation is everything. Your network is your currency. Your relationships are your assets. And Emily had just publicly humiliated the executive vice president of one of the biggest players in the industry. At her own wedding, in front of 150 witnesses. That kind of story doesn't stay quiet. The pharmaceutical and biotech world is smaller than people think. Everyone knows everyone. Conferences, trade shows, industry events, professional organizations, the same faces appear over and over. And those faces talk. They share stories over drinks at hotel bars. They gossip during coffee breaks at conferences. They message each other on LinkedIn and text each other screenshots of interesting developments. By Monday afternoon, probably half the pharmaceutical sales representatives on the East Coast knew what had happened at Michael and Emily's wedding. By Tuesday, it had spread to the Midwest and West Coast. By Wednesday, it was the story everyone was whispering about. Did you hear about the Garrison biotech rep who insulted a pharma executive at her wedding? Did you hear it was the executive's own son who did it? Did you hear she'd paid for the whole wedding and they didn't even know who she was? The details got embellished with each retelling, but the core truth remained. Emily Chen had made a catastrophic professional mistake, and I hadn't said a word, hadn't told anyone outside that reception hall what happened, hadn't posted about it, hadn't gossiped, hadn't used my position or influence to damage her reputation. I didn't have to. 150 people had witnessed it, and apparently, several of them had phones and social media accounts and friends in the industry. The story spread organically, propelled by its own shocking nature. A cautionary tale about the importance of treating everyone with respect, regardless of their apparent status. A reminder that you never know who someone really is or what power they might hold. A lesson about assumptions and humility and the danger of judging people by their surface appearance. Emily had become the example nobody wanted to be. And her career was paying the price. Jennifer was still on the phone waiting for my response. "What do you want me to tell her if she calls again?" she asked. I thought about it. Thought about Emily crying at her wedding. Thought about her desperate text messages apologizing. Thought about her understanding that there would be consequences. Thought about whether she deserved this or whether the punishment exceeded the crime. "Tell her I'm still unavailable," I said finally. "But schedule a meeting for next week. Tuesday afternoon. 1 hour. My office." Jennifer made a note. I could hear her typing. "Will do. Anything else?" "No," I said. "Thank you for letting me know. And Jennifer, this stays between us." "Of course," she said. "I'll see you tomorrow when you're back." We hung up. I sat with my coffee thinking about Emily. She was 28 years old, ambitious, hardworking. She'd made a mistake, absolutely. A significant one. But did she deserve to have her career derailed because of it? She'd treated me poorly based on false information. Had dismissed me, overlooked me, seated me at table 17 like I didn't matter. But she'd done it because she genuinely believed I was who Michael had told her I was. A low-level administrator with a simple job. If I had been that person, would her behavior have been acceptable? No. Respect shouldn't be conditional on status. But would it have had these consequences? Also no. The punishment she was receiving wasn't really for being rude to me personally. It was for making a politically disastrous mistake that threatened her company's most important partnership, for failing to do basic research about her new mother-in-law, for allowing personal relationships to create professional complications. Be honest. Do you think Emily deserved what happened to her career, or did the punishment not fit the crime? Let me know in the comments. Michael's situation was more complicated than Emily's, more layered, more directly connected to decisions I had to make rather than consequences that happened organically. His company, the tech firm where he'd just made junior partner and was so proud of his position, was in active talks with my division about a potential integration, had been for about 5 months before the wedding. They developed a software platform for managing clinical trial data, tracking patient outcomes, coordinating between research sites. Sophisticated technology that could genuinely improve how pharmaceutical research was conducted. We were considering a partnership that would bring their platform into our research infrastructure across all of Garrison Pharmaceutical's clinical trials worldwide. It was a $340 million deal. The kind of deal that would transform a mid-sized tech company into an industry leader. The kind of deal that would make junior partners into senior partners. The kind of deal that would set up careers for decades. After the wedding, after that Saturday night that felt like it had lasted a year, I knew I had a professional obligation to address the conflict of interest that had just been created. Monday morning, before I'd even decided to take time off, I sent a formal letter to our board of directors and to the executive committee overseeing the tech integration project. In it, I explained that my son was a junior partner at the firm under consideration. That there had been a personal conflict at a family event that created potential complications. That to maintain the integrity of our decision-making process and avoid any appearance of bias, either for or against the company, I was recusing myself from any further involvement in the evaluation or approval process. Someone else would need to take lead on the partnership assessment. Someone without personal connections to the firm. I didn't mention what happened at the wedding specifically. Didn't explain that my son had publicly humiliated me. Just stated the facts. There's a conflict of interest. I'm removing myself. Proceed without my input. I didn't kill the deal. Didn't use my position to punish Michael professionally. Didn't make phone calls suggesting the board pass on the partnership. Didn't leverage my influence to destroy his company's opportunity. But I also didn't save it. Didn't advocate for it. Didn't use my credibility and expertise to push it through. Just stepped back and let the process proceed without me. The board reviewed the acquisition proposal over the next 2 weeks, brought in external consultants to assess the technology, ran financial projections, evaluated the strategic fit. And without my division's full backing, without my enthusiastic support and commitment to integration, the numbers didn't make sense. The partnership required significant investment from our research division, required my team's time and resources to implement the technology across our clinical trial infrastructure, required my personal commitment that this was a priority worth pursuing. Without that, it was just an expensive software platform that might or might not improve efficiency. 3 weeks after the wedding, the board passed on the deal. Sent a polite letter to Michael's company, explaining that while they appreciated the proposal and respected the technology, it wasn't the right fit for Garrison Pharmaceuticals at this time. Michael's company took it hard. They'd been counting on that partnership, had projected revenue based on it, had hired staff in anticipation of it, had made promises to investors that depended on it coming through. When it fell apart, they had to restructure, had to cut costs, had to eliminate positions that were no longer sustainable without the projected growth. Michael was one of 4 junior partners who were transitioned out. That's the phrase they used. Transitioned out. Like it was a voluntary evolution rather than being let go. He lost his job 5 weeks after his wedding. 5 weeks after standing at a microphone and talking about success and ambition and building something extraordinary. I didn't cause it. That's what I told myself. The board made an independent decision based on the merits of the proposal without my input. Michael's company failed to secure the partnership because the numbers didn't work, not because I interfered. He lost his job because his company overstretched and had to contract, not because I orchestrated his firing. All of that was technically true, but I also didn't stop it, didn't use my influence to save the deal, didn't advocate for the partnership despite the personal complications, didn't protect my son's career, even though I could have. And I'm still not sure how I feel about that. Part of me feels guilty. Feels like I let my hurt feelings affect a professional decision. Feels like I punished Michael by withholding support he didn't even know he needed. But another part of me feels like I did exactly what I should have done. Maintained professional integrity, refused to let family relationships compromise business decisions. Let the deal succeed or fail on its own merits without my thumb on the scale in either direction. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. I didn't actively destroy Michael's career, but I didn't save it either when I could have, and the consequences for him were significant. Loss of income, loss of status, loss of the professional identity he'd been building, all happening at the exact moment he was supposed to be celebrating his new marriage and his bright future. But the professional fallout was nothing compared to what happened to their marriage, because Emily didn't just blame herself for what happened at the wedding. She blamed Michael for not telling her who I was, for humiliating me publicly, for creating the professional disaster that was now consuming both their careers. And what came next? The implosion of their relationship in the months following their perfect wedding. I never saw it coming. The marriage lasted 7 months. 7 months from that September wedding to the February morning when Emily filed divorce papers in Connecticut family court. 7 months of a union that was supposed to last a lifetime. 7 months to go from this is perfect to I can't do this anymore. The wedding I'd paid $95,000 for, the celebration that was supposed to launch their life together, had instead set in motion a collapse that neither of them saw coming. I heard about the separation through Richard. Of all people. It was a Sunday morning in late February. I was reading the newspaper over coffee when my phone rang. Richard's name on the screen. We hadn't spoken since the wedding, hadn't exchanged a single word in 5 months. I considered not answering, but curiosity won. "Catherine," he said when I picked up. "It's Richard. I thought you should know. Michael and Emily are separating." I didn't say anything for a long moment. Just absorbed the information. Tried to figure out how I felt about it. Sad for Michael, certainly. But not surprised. Not even a little bit surprised. "When did this happen?" I finally asked. "She filed papers on Friday," Richard said. "He's devastated. He's been staying at my place since she asked him to move out 2 weeks ago." I took a sip of coffee. Let the silence stretch. Richard filled it like he always did when he was uncomfortable. "She's blaming him. For not telling her about you. For making her look foolish in front of her bosses. For costing her her career. She says he misrepresented his family's situation, that she married him under false pretenses. Did he tell her the truth? I asked. What truth? Richard said, and I could hear genuine confusion in his voice. That he didn't know either. That I never told him who I really was. That he'd spent 15 years believing exactly what you told him to believe about me. Richard was quiet for a long moment. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, processing. He tried to explain that, Richard finally said. She doesn't believe him. Doesn't believe that he didn't know. Says there's no way he could have lived his whole life not knowing his own mother's career. That he must have known and just never told her, or didn't think it mattered enough to mention. Michael tried to show her the evidence. The modest apartment he thought I lived in, the simple clothes I wore, the old car I drove to our monthly dinners, the fact that I'd never once mentioned my position or my accomplishments. But Emily saw all of that as deliberate deception on his part rather than on mine. Saw it as Michael hiding his family's success to seem more self-made than he actually was. She couldn't accept that he genuinely didn't know. Couldn't reconcile the idea that a son wouldn't know the most basic facts about his own mother's life. According to Richard, who was getting the information from Michael in late-night conversations over whiskey, the fight started the morning after the wedding. They'd spent their wedding night at the hotel attached to the venue. Had woken up Sunday morning as husband and wife. Should have been happy. Should have been planning their honeymoon to Bali that was scheduled to leave in 3 days. Instead, Emily woke up to 17 missed calls from colleagues, texts from friends in the industry, messages asking if it was true, if the Dr. Catherine Morrison was really her new mother-in-law, if she'd really not known. Her phone was exploding, with the story spreading through pharmaceutical and biotech circles. And she was furious. How could you not know? She'd asked Michael. How could you not know your own mother was a pharmaceutical executive? Michael tried to explain. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. She told me she worked in medical administration. Low-level job. That's what I believed. That's what my father always said. Emily didn't want to hear it. She was humiliated, terrified about her job, worried about her reputation, and she needed someone to blame. Michael was the available target. How could you mock her in public without even checking? Emily had demanded. Do you have any idea what you've done to my career? To our future? Your mother controls partnerships worth hundreds of millions of dollars. She could have opened doors for us. She could have helped my company. She could have been an asset. And you publicly humiliated her at our wedding in front of everyone who matters in my industry. Michael had apparently broken down at that point, started crying, apologizing, saying he didn't know, he didn't understand, how could he have known? But Emily was already pulling away, already seeing him differently. The man she'd married 24 hours earlier was not who she thought he was. She'd married the son of Richard Morrison, successful attorney from old money, junior partner at a promising tech firm. Someone with connections and status and a bright future, but that person turned out to be a facade. Or at least that's how Emily saw it. Michael wasn't self-made. He was the son of one of the most powerful women in pharmaceuticals, and he didn't even know it. He'd dismissed his own mother as unsuccessful without doing even basic research. He'd made her look like a fool in front of her boss. And worst of all, he'd cost her the professional opportunity of a lifetime, because Emily didn't just see me as Michael's mother. She saw me as a missed connection, a networking opportunity that had been right in front of her and that Michael's ignorance had destroyed. If she'd known who I was from the beginning, she could have built a relationship with me, could have impressed me with her knowledge and ambition, could have positioned herself as the daughter-in-law who understood pharmaceuticals and could speak my language. Instead, she'd seated me at table 17 and introduced me to people as someone who worked in medical administration. The shame of it consumed her. The fights continued through the honeymoon. They didn't cancel because the deposits were non-refundable. 7 days in Bali spent arguing in luxury hotel rooms. Coming back to their new apartment, the one they'd just signed a lease on, the one they'd furnished together, and continuing to argue. Emily's demotion at work became official 2 weeks after the wedding. She went from working on major acquisitions to managing small existing accounts. Her salary stayed the same, but her trajectory had fundamentally changed. Everyone at her company knew why. Everyone in the industry knew why. She'd become a cautionary tale, and she blamed Michael for all of it. Michael lost his job 3 weeks after the wedding, came home, and had to tell his new wife that he'd been let go, that the promising career he'd built was over, that he was unemployed and would need to start looking for new opportunities in a terrible job market. Emily's response, according to Richard, was cold. Well, now we're both suffering because of your mistake, because of your ignorance about your own family. By November, 3 months after the wedding, they were barely speaking, living in the same apartment but operating as roommates rather than spouses. Emily stayed late at work. Michael networked desperately, trying to find a new position. They ate dinner in silence when they ate together at all. The love that was supposed to sustain them through challenges never materialized, because it turned out their relationship wasn't built on love. It was built on shared ambition, mutual benefit, strategic alignment of goals and status. And when the status disappeared, when the ambition led to failure instead of success, there was nothing left to hold them together. By December, Emily had moved into the guest room. By January, she'd consulted a divorce attorney. By February, she'd filed papers. The marriage was over before it had really begun. And Michael, Richard told me during that Sunday morning phone call, was completely broken. "He's lost everything," Richard said. His wife, his job, his future. He made one mistake, and it cost him everything. I thought about that characterization. One mistake, as if the wedding speech was an isolated incident rather than the culmination of 15 years of disrespect and dismissal. As if Michael's ignorance about my life was an accident rather than a choice he'd made over and over to believe his father's narrative and never question it. As if the consequences he was facing were disproportionate rather than exactly what happens when you build your life on false assumptions and treat people as disposable. "It wasn't one mistake, Richard," I said quietly. "It was 15 years of mistakes. 15 years of choosing to see me as less than I was. 15 years of accepting your version of events without ever asking for mine. This didn't happen because of one speech. This happened because Michael built his entire sense of self on a foundation of lies. And when the truth came out, everything collapsed." Richard didn't have a response to that. We ended the call shortly after, and I sat with the knowledge that my son's marriage was over, that the wedding I'd paid for had led directly to a divorce, and that somewhere in all of this pain and consequence and fallout, there were lessons being learned that should have been learned years ago. I didn't see Michael for 4 months after the wedding, didn't respond to his texts or his calls or his increasingly desperate emails. Blocked his number for the first month because I couldn't handle the constant notifications, the constant reminders, the constant demands for my attention and forgiveness and understanding. I needed space, needed time to process what had happened and figure out who I was in the aftermath of having my secret exposed. For 15 years, I'd lived a double life, powerful executive at work, dismissed mother at home. And now that those two worlds had collided in the most spectacular way possible, I needed to figure out how to integrate them, how to be one whole person instead of two fractured versions. Michael's need for absolution would have to wait. I wasn't ready. Didn't know if I'd ever be ready. Was genuinely considering the possibility that our relationship had been damaged beyond repair and that the healthiest thing for both of us might be to simply walk away from each other permanently. Then in October, on a Thursday afternoon when I was reviewing quarterly research reports, my assistant Jennifer called my office line. "Dr. Morrison," she said, and I could hear uncertainty in her voice. "Your son is here. In the lobby. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important. He's asking if you have a few minutes to see him." I set down the report I'd been reading, felt my chest tighten. Michael was here, in my building, in the lobby of Garrison Pharmaceutical's headquarters where I was. Dr. Catherine Morrison, Executive Vice President, not Mom. He'd crossed the boundary between our two worlds, was standing in my professional space asking for access to me. I could have had security escort him out. Could have sent a message through Jennifer that I was in meetings all day. Could have maintained the distance I'd been carefully preserving for 4 months. But something made me pause, made me consider that maybe it was time, that maybe enough space had been created, that maybe I needed to hear what he had to say. "Send him up," I said. Jennifer confirmed the instruction, and I hung up. Had about 3 minutes before he'd arrive. I stood up, smoothed my suit jacket, looked around my office with fresh eyes, trying to see it the way Michael would. The corner office on the 42nd floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. The mahogany desk that was bigger than the kitchen in the trailer I grew up in. The wall of diplomas and awards and patents. Ohio State undergraduate degree, Stanford PhD, 16 patent certificates. Industry awards from pharmaceutical associations. Photos of me with senators at congressional hearings, with other executives at conferences, with researchers whose lives I'd changed by funding their projects. This was my world, the world Michael didn't know existed. And he was about to walk into it and finally understand exactly who his mother was. I heard the elevator ding, heard Jennifer's voice greeting him, heard footsteps approaching my office. He appeared in the doorway and just stopped. Froze completely. Stared at the space, like he'd walked into a museum instead of an office. His eyes went from the windows to the desk, to the walls, to me standing behind it all. He was thinner than I remembered. Looked tired, worn down. The confident junior partner who'd stood at a microphone and dismissed his simple mother was gone. In his place was a man who looked lost. "Mom," he said. His voice cracked on the single syllable. I gestured to the chairs in front of my desk. "Sit down, Michael." He walked in slowly, still looking around, still processing. He sat. I sat. We looked at each other across my massive desk. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds. "I'm so sorry," he finally said. The words came out rushed, desperate. "I'm so sorry for everything. For the wedding. For the speech. For 15 years of treating you like you didn't matter. I'm so sorry." I didn't respond immediately. Just watched him. Let him sit with the discomfort. Let him feel what it was like to be the one seeking approval and acknowledgement from someone who wasn't giving it freely. He continued talking, filling the silence. "I believe Dad. When he told me you chose your career over us. When he said you cared more about work than family. When he painted you as someone who'd failed at what really mattered. I believed all of it. I never questioned it. Never asked for your side of the story. Never did even basic research into who you actually were or what you actually did. I just accepted his version of events because it was easier, because it made me feel better about the divorce, because it gave me someone to blame." "I know," I said quietly. And that acknowledgement seemed to break something in him. Tears started streaming down his face. "I thought you were someone who gave up," he said. "Someone who settled. Someone who was content with less because you couldn't achieve more. I thought I was better than you. I thought I'd surpassed you. I thought my ambition and my success made me superior. And the whole time, you were this." He gestured around the office. "At the view, at the awards, at the evidence of a career that dwarfed anything he'd accomplished or likely ever would accomplish. You were building an empire while I was dismissing you as irrelevant. You were saving lives while I was pitying you for your simple existence. You were one of the most powerful people in your industry while I was telling my wife you'd never understood ambition. The irony of it, the complete inversion of reality, it's destroying me. I've lost everything. Emily, my job, my sense of who I was, and I deserve it. I deserve all of it. I don't expect you to forgive me," he continued. "I don't expect you to want a relationship with me. I just needed you to know that I understand now what I lost, who you are, what you sacrificed. I needed to tell you that I see you, finally. After 15 years of being blind, I see you." I looked at my son across the desk. This man I'd carried inside me. This person I'd loved more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. This child who'd grown into someone I didn't recognize and who didn't recognize me. And I felt a complicated mess of emotions. Pain for the years we'd lost. Anger at the disrespect I'd endured. Sadness for the relationship we could have had if he'd been willing to really know me. But also something else. Something softer. Understanding maybe. Or at least the beginning of it. Because Michael was right. He'd been taught to see me as a failure. Richard had spent years constructing that narrative, and Michael had been 12 years old when it started. Just a child trying to make sense of his parents' divorce. He'd believed what he was told because children generally do. The tragedy was that he'd never questioned it as he grew older, had never wondered if maybe there was more to the story. "I forgive you, Michael," I said. The words surprised me as much as they surprised him. His head jerked up. He'd been staring at his hands. Now he was staring at me with something that looked like hope. "I forgive you because I understand how you got here. I understand that you were taught to see me a certain way. That Richard's narrative was compelling and consistent, and you had no reason to question it. I understand that I contributed to the problem by hiding my success, by trying to make you love me for who I was, instead of what I'd achieved, by not being honest about my life. We both made mistakes. Both contributed to this situation. So yes, I forgive you. But Michael, and this is important, I can't forget." I paused. Let him absorb that. "I can't forget what it felt like to sit at table 17, to hear you dismiss me in front of 150 people, to watch you thank everyone except me, to realize that I was invisible to you, that I'd been invisible for years. I can't unknow that. And I can't go back to being invisible in your life just to make you comfortable," I continued. "If we're going to have a relationship moving forward, it has to be different. It has to be honest. You have to see me as I actually am, not as some simplified version that fits your narrative. You have to respect me not because of my job title, but because I'm a human being who deserves respect. You have to do the work of actually knowing me instead of making assumptions. Can you do that? Michael nodded, wiped his eyes. Yes, I want to do that. I want to know you, the real you. I want to understand your work and your life and everything I've missed. I want to build something real instead of the fiction we've been living in. Good, I said. Then we can try, slowly, carefully, with clear boundaries and honest communication. But Michael, if you ever dismiss me again, if you ever treat me as less than I am, we're done. Permanently. No second chances. I've given you 15 years of chances. This is the last one. He stood up. I stood up. For a moment we just looked at each other across my desk. Then he walked around it and hugged me. Just wrapped his arms around me and held on like he was afraid I'd disappear. I hugged him back. Felt tears on my own face now. This wasn't reconciliation exactly. It was too soon for that. Too much damage had been done. But it was a beginning, a possibility, a small opening in the wall that had grown between us. When we pulled apart, Michael looked around the office one more time. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me believe you were unsuccessful for so long?" I considered the question, the same question I'd been asking myself for months. "Because I wanted you to love me for who I was," I said finally, "not for what I'd accomplished, not for my job or my money or my status. I wanted to matter to you just as your mother, just as the person who loved you unconditionally. And I thought that if I proved that I could be worthy of love without achievements to back it up, that would mean more than any success I could demonstrate. But you were wrong," Michael said gently. "You were worthy of love all along, with or without the achievements. The problem wasn't that you needed to prove your worth. The problem was that I was measuring worth by the wrong metrics. That Dad taught me to value the wrong things, that I needed to learn what actually matters. And I'm learning that now, the hard way, but I'm learning it." We talked for another hour. About his divorce, about his job search, about the therapy he'd started, about his understanding of how Richard had manipulated his perception of me, about my work and my life, and the things I'd accomplished that he'd never known about. It wasn't comfortable. There were long pauses and difficult moments, and things that needed to be said that hurt to say and hurt to hear. But it was real. More real than any conversation we'd had in 15 years. When he left, I sat in my office for a long time, looking out at the city, thinking about forgiveness and consequences, and whether damaged relationships can truly be repaired, or if they just become different versions of themselves. I didn't have answers, but I had a beginning, and maybe that was enough. That was 2 years ago. 2 years since Michael showed up at my office broken and apologetic. 2 years since we started the slow, painful work of rebuilding something that had been shattered for 15 years. Today, we have lunch once a month, usually at a quiet restaurant halfway between his apartment and my office. We talk about his life, my work, current events, things we're reading. It's not perfect. There's still hurt underneath the surface, still moments where old patterns try to reassert themselves, still distance that hasn't been bridged. But we're trying. Actually trying this time, not performing a relationship but building a real one based on honesty instead of assumptions. Michael's in therapy now, has been since the divorce, working through the things Richard taught him about worth and success and what matters in life, working through his own shame about how he treated me, about the years he wasted believing a narrative instead of seeking truth. He's engaged again, to a woman named Sarah Chen, no relation to Emily despite the shared last name. She's a high school teacher, teaches chemistry to 10th graders at a public school in Brooklyn. She's kind in a way that seems effortless, grounded in a way that comes from knowing who she is and being comfortable with it, real in a way Emily never was. She doesn't care about status or connections or networking opportunities. She cares about her students and her work and the people she loves. When Michael first told me he was seeing someone, I was cautious, worried he'd repeat the same patterns, choose someone for the wrong reasons, build another relationship on shared ambition instead of genuine connection. But then I met Sarah, and within 5 minutes of talking to her, I understood that she was different, that Michael had learned something from the catastrophe of his first marriage. The first time he introduced us was at a coffee shop in the village. I got there early, nervous in a way I hadn't expected to be. Michael arrived with Sarah, and I could see immediately that he was nervous too. "Sarah, this is my mom," he said, "Dr. Catherine Morrison." She's the executive vice president of medical innovation at Garrison Pharmaceuticals. She's the most successful person I know, and I spent 15 years being too stupid to see it. I cried when he said that, right there in the coffee shop. Not delicate tears, real crying, because it wasn't about the title or the position or the acknowledgement of my professional success. It was about being seen. Finally, after all these years, Michael saw me, really saw me, not as the simple mother he'd dismissed, not as the powerful executive he'd been shocked to discover, but as a complete person. His mother, who also happened to be accomplished, a woman who contained multitudes instead of fitting into a single narrow category. Sarah hugged me like we were already family. "I've heard so much about you," she said. "And I mean the real you, not the version Michael thought existed. He's told me everything. About the wedding and the divorce and the years of not knowing you. About his therapy and what he's learning about himself. About his regrets and his hopes for your relationship. I just want you to know that I think you're amazing. Not just because of your career, but because you kept trying with him even when he gave you every reason to give up. Michael doesn't deserve you, frankly. But I'm going to make sure he does better this time." I laughed through my tears. "I like you already," I told her. "Good," she said. "Because you're going to be my mother-in-law eventually, and I plan on us being friends." She wasn't threatened by me, wasn't trying to impress me, just accepted me as I was and expected to be accepted in return. It was refreshing. Emily left pharmaceutical sales about 6 months after the divorce. The demotion at Garrison Biotech became untenable once her marriage ended, and the story continued to follow her through industry circles. Last I heard, she's working in medical device marketing at a smaller company based in New Jersey. Lower profile, less competitive. A place where her history isn't immediately known and where she can rebuild her career away from the spotlight of major pharmaceutical partnerships. She sent me a letter about a year after the divorce. It arrived at my office in a cream envelope with careful handwriting on the front. I almost didn't open it, almost had Jennifer return it. But curiosity won. It was 3 pages long, handwritten. An apology that went into detail about her regrets and her shame. An explanation of how she'd been raised to value status above character, and how the wedding disaster had forced her to confront that. A request for forgiveness that acknowledged she probably didn't deserve it, but hoped for it anyway. I read it twice, sat with it for a few days, thought about what kind of response she deserved, what kind of closure I needed. And then I wrote back. 1 sentence on my personal stationery. "I appreciate your apology, and I wish you well in your future." Nothing more, nothing less. I didn't forgive her. Not in the deep, meaningful way that releases all resentment and restores relationship. But I didn't hold on to anger either. Didn't let bitterness take root. Didn't waste energy on hatred or revenge. Emily was a casualty of her own ambition. Of a value system that measured people by their usefulness rather than their humanity. She'd learned a hard lesson at 28 years old. Lost a marriage, damaged her career, became a cautionary tale in her industry. That was punishment enough. She didn't need my continued resentment on top of it. So I let her go, wished her well genuinely, and moved on. People ask me if I regret how I handled it. If I should have spoken up sooner. If I should have told Michael the truth years ago instead of letting him believe I was unsuccessful. If I should have corrected Richard's narrative the moment it started instead of letting it calcify over 15 years. And here's what I've learned through all of this pain and revelation and rebuilding. You can't make people see your worth by proving it. You can't force recognition by demonstrating credentials. You can't earn respect by showing your resume. They have to choose to see you. Have to decide that you're worth knowing beyond their assumptions. Have to be willing to look past the surface and ask questions and seek truth. And if they don't, that says everything about them and nothing about you. I spent 15 years trying to be enough for my son. Trying to earn his love without my accomplishments. Trying to prove that a mother's worth exists independent of her professional success. Trying to be seen for who I was at my core, rather than what I'd achieved in my career. And in the end, the only person who needed to see me was me. I needed to see my own worth, needed to stop hiding my light to make other people comfortable, needed to stand in my full truth instead of diminishing myself in hopes that someone would love the smaller version. That wedding cost me $95,000, but it bought me something priceless. Freedom. Freedom from hiding. Freedom from shame about my success. Freedom from the exhausting work of being 2 different people. Freedom to just be myself, completely and unapologetically, and let people accept or reject that truth as they chose. So that's my story. The most expensive wedding gift I ever gave, the most painful family event I've ever endured, and the most valuable lesson I ever learned about worth and respect and the cost of invisibility. If you're watching this, and you've ever felt invisible to someone you love, if you've ever sacrificed everything and received nothing in return, if you've ever had to choose between your dignity and keeping the peace, I see you. Your accomplishments are real, even if they're not acknowledged. Your worth exists, even if it's not recognized. And your value isn't determined by other people's blindness or willful ignorance or comfortable assumptions. You don't have to make yourself small to make other people comfortable. You don't have to hide your light to avoid outshining someone else. You don't have to apologize for being exactly who you are. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you have done in my position? Would you have paid for the wedding? Would you have walked out earlier? Would you have told Michael the truth years ago? I genuinely want to know how you would have handled this situation. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more true stories about family, justice, karma, and finding your worth in the aftermath of betrayal. And if you want to hear about the time a father discovered his son was stealing his identity to fund a secret business and destroying his credit in the process, that story is even more shocking than this one. Click the video on your screen to watch it next. You won't believe what happened when the truth came out. I'm Dr. Catherine Morrison, Executive Vice President of Medical Innovation at Garrison Pharmaceuticals. Mother, survivor, and I'm done being invisible. Thank you for listening to my story. Until next time, remember that your worth isn't up for debate. It simply is, whether people recognize it or not.